Europeans had been coming to the West African coast for centuries. The first were the Portuguese back in the 16th century, but the British weren't far behind. To this place came loads of palm oil and palm kernels, most of which was shipped to Liverpool for making into soap. And it came from the hinterland. At that time, it was a little-known country and ruled by a number of African kings, the most powerful of whom was the Oba of Benin. The first Portuguese visitors had brought back many stories of the Oba's military might and thought him so powerful that they took back an ambassador to Lisbon to be received by the King of Portugal. The Oba was a human god, so sacred that no commoner could look in his face. On the few occasions he left his palace, he was preceded by musicians and leopards, the symbols of his power. He owned dwarfs, just as European kings did at that time. He also practiced human sacrifice in order to sweeten his land with blood. Benin remained almost unchanged right into the 19th century, and then in January 1897, the vice-consul of a British trading settlement on the coast decided to visit the Oba. The Oba had recently accepted a trading agreement with the British, but he wasn't keeping it. No palm nuts or palm oil were coming out of his territory, so the Oba had to be reprimanded. The traditional way to reach the city was to travel up the mangrove-lined creeks of the Niger Delta to the village of Ugoton, which marked the frontier with the Benin Kingdom. Messengers had been sent ahead by canoes with gifts to tell the Oba that the British vice-consul proposed to visit him. But as they traveled upriver, they met messengers on their way back with a reply. The Oba did not wish to see the British at this particular time. The party reached Ugoton on the afternoon of January the 3rd. On the way up, they had been collecting carriers, and now they had the 240 men that they needed to carry all their supplies. But here there were more messages from the Oba telling them not to come. The local people gave them vehement warnings. It would be very unwise to go to Benin now, they said, for the Oba was celebrating Igwe. Igwe was and is the most important of all Benin rituals. It was last held in 1964 when these pictures were taken. During it, the Oba salutes the shrines of the earlier god kings, his ancestors, and renews his divine power. He parades and dances, decked with coral crown and tunic, with ivory bracelets on his arms and bronze masks at his waist. And sacrifices are made. Only by blood may the land be cleansed of corruption and kept pure. Special plants and earths are brought from all over the kingdom and pounded together with blood to make a magic medicine with which the Oba will be anointed to give him strength. And in 1897, as in previous years, the climax of Igwe was to be the sacrifice of a man. It may be that the Oba was trying to prevent the British vice-consul from seeing these grisly rites. At any rate, his messengers did their best to persuade the British to delay, if only by a few days. But Vice-Consul Phillips was not to be put off, and with his British companions and 240 carriers, he left Ugoton at 7 o'clock on the morning of the next day, January the 4th. Their only weapons were revolvers, and those they packed away in their baggage to emphasize that they were coming in peace. Yet they knew that the sacred and secret rituals of Igwe were continuing in the city even as they marched. This is the path they took. It is so thin and narrow that they had to march in single file, and it wound through the thickest bush. The Benin chiefs, without the Oba's knowledge, had prepared an ambush, and at 3 o'clock in the afternoon of January the 4th, Vice-Consul Phillips led his men straight into it. Europeans and Africans were slaughtered indiscriminately. Only 2 Europeans escaped. The Benin warriors hunted them through these thick forests and came within yards of them several times. They had nothing to eat, and the only thing to drink was the dew from the leaves. One of them was badly wounded, but after 5 days they reached the river. The wounded man's arm had already turned gangrenous. Both their bodies were black with thorns. The news of the massacre had gone ahead of them, and on January the 11th, only 7 days after the massacre, it was in London. A punitive expedition had to be mounted. The British government summoned ships from the Cape and the Mediterranean. Marines were dispatched from England. By the first week of February, 1,500 men had begun the march on Benin. The battle was fierce, but inevitably short. The Bini tribesmen had no chance against Maxim guns and rockets. On February the 18th, after 4 days of sporadic fighting and only 6 weeks after the massacre, the British took Benin City. In the abandoned palace, the victorious soldiers found wonders and horrors. The Oba, in panic at the impending revenge of the British, had, it seemed, embarked on an orgy of human sacrifice in an endeavour to stave off disaster, and the bodies of the dead lay in pits beneath the trees on which many of them had been crucified. The victors posed for their photographs in the palace courtyards. Stacked behind them, objects from the palace shrines that they were to bring back to Britain either as personal souvenirs or official booty. There was an astonishing number: sculptures of ivory, wooden masks, huge elephant tusks covered along their length with elaborate scenes. But above all, there were bronzes. The finest were of astonishing quality. Was it possible that the sculptors of this remote kingdom, buried in the West African forest, had produced entirely by themselves objects of such technical skill and sculptural inspiration that they rivaled the most accomplished works of Europe? There were many in Europe who were to doubt it. The Portuguese, after all, had once had great influence here. Surely it must have been they who taught the Bini how to make such splendid things. The British government, which was concerned with neither romance nor scholarship, put the loot on sale in order to defray the cost of the expedition to the taxpayer. And today, the treasure of Benin is dispersed among museums and collections all over the world, in Britain and America, Germany, Russia, Switzerland, Sweden, France, and Australia. The second biggest collection is now back in Nigeria, but none of the objects have returned to the place from which they were taken, the palace of the Oba of Benin. A few weeks afterwards, the chief who led the ambush was tried and hanged. Others, who had fled with the Oba, returned and sued for forgiveness. The Oba himself was found innocent of plotting the ambush and sent to exile. He died in 1913, and that year his son, supported by the British administration, came back to rule again in Benin. Benin today is one of the main cities of Nigeria. The old palace was largely destroyed, but it has been rebuilt on the same site, and it still echoes with chants in praise of the god king of the Bini.
Thanks for watching. For more educative videos like this, kindly subscribe to our YouTube channel, like and share, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell.